thank you for taking the time to join today's webinar, EU Machinery Regulations. A recorded version of the webinar will be available to you after the broadcast has finished. This will include a recording of the Q&A at the end. We'd love to hear from you, so please submit your questions at any time during the webinar. You will find the Q&A panel on your screen and your questions will not be seen by any other attendees. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can, but if we do run out of time, we'll follow up with any unanswered questions via email. As an introduction, I am Danielle and I'm a Business Development Manager here at TÜV SÜD. I'm part of the Academy team and I've been working here for the past 3 years. My role involves overseeing the sales side of the Academy as well as managing our key accounts. So if you do have any questions training related after this webinar, please feel free to reach out. Today we'll be discussing EU machinery regulations and key changes in how to prepare for 2027. Our presenter for today is Hefin Llewellyn-Evans, one of our technical trainers. After joining TÜV SÜD Academy as a technical trainer at the start of the year, Hefin will be delivering training courses focusing on functional safety, machinery safety and process safety. He has been working in these industries for 6 years and is now keen to start sharing the knowledge he has gained with those looking to deepen their safety expertise. So I'll hand things over to you, Hefin.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Danielle, for that introduction. So good morning, everybody. My name is Hefin, and during this webinar, we'll be exploring more about the new EU machinery regulation. We'll be covering why it replaces the old machinery directive, what has changed with this new regulation, and cover points on how companies can prepare before the regulation takes effect on the 20th of January 2027. So, during this webinar, we'll be looking to achieve these following objectives. We'll be looking to understand the drivers behind replacing the directive, identify the key dates and the transition period. We'll be recognizing the major changes between the machinery regulation and the machinery directive. And finally, we'll be understanding the next steps of the regulation's ongoing updates and its implementation. So this is a quick agenda for today's webinar. First, I'll be covering the overview and the purpose of the new regulation, but also covering a few points associated with the limitations of the existing machinery directive. The second topic is to talk through some of the key dates and the timeline. Thirdly, we'll be looking at the product listed in the standard, covering some of its inclusions and exclusions. And the fourth topic is the more important one of today's session, and we'll be talking through some of the key changes that have been introduced. And the fifth topic, we'll be looking at covering some of the expected next steps for the regulation. And very good timing, we've got the alarm going off, apologies for that. And finally, a quick summary towards the end of the session. So first, we'll be looking at the overview and the purpose of the new machinery regulation. So the machinery directive was originally published back in 1989, and this required mandatory application 6 years later in 1995, and then the publication established a unified set of health and safety requirements for machinery manufacturers to apply, and this promoted a free movement of goods across the European market. Then in 2006, what was called the new machinery directive was published, and this was a machinery directive that we're still familiar with today, Machinery Directive 2006/42/EC. And this is what we're still using today to ensure that there's a regulated machinery safety across Europe. And by establishing the European requirements as a directive, member states had the flexibility in meeting the directive's objectives. However, this led to some different interpretations and also led to legal uncertainties for the users of the directive, and most notably machinery manufacturers. When manufacturers exported their machines to different EU countries, local authorities may interpret these details in the directive differently. And this has been enforced for nearly 20 years. The directive sets out the essential health and safety requirements and supports the CE marking process. But now the Machinery Directive is being replaced by this EU Machinery Regulation 2023-1230. So contrary to the Machinery Directive, this regulation, since it is a regulation, must be applied directly by all EU member states. This means that the different national interpretations would be significantly reduced, but would also improve legal clarity. Additionally, the administrative burden for manufacturers and authorized representatives will also be reduced because of this. Furthermore, the regulation has also had updates to incorporate technological development and state-of-the-art progression, which I'll be covering more in later slides. So first, I'm going to take you through some of the fundamental reasons why this regulation has been introduced and some of the benefits that will provide us going forwards. So firstly, it will be replacing the national laws of the European country with one directly applicable regulation, which means that the machinery will be able to be moved more freely across EU borders without duplicated checks and without conflicted interpretations. It also create a form of level playing fields and preserve global competitiveness for all economic operators. So ranging from large companies down to small SMEs, since all organizations will be following the same safety requirements. So the EU has aligned the machinery regulation with the new legislative framework, the NLF. And this is that introduced further obligations on machinery's importers and distributors. And for those who aren't aware, the NLF was established in 2008, and it's a harmonized EU legal framework to improve product safety, compliance, and marketing surveillance across the European Union, just to ensure there's a smooth single EU market. But these regulations, through introducing the essential health and safety requirements, will be supported by the harmonized standards we're familiar with, but also a new term, common specifications, which I'll be touching upon later. But these harmonized standards and these common specifications will all be listed in the official journal. So the regulation is structured to adapt continuously, so ensuring it stays ahead of risks posed by emerging digital technologies. Another benefit is that the regulation is looking to reduce administrative barriers, hoping to promote and boost further innovation within the EU. It will also reduce costs for industry by removing the need to duplicate testing of products. And the final benefit, it will introduce the permitting of digital instructions and digital declarations of conformity. So as you can see, there's a long list of improvements and benefits that this new regulation is likely to both offer machinery manufacturers and distributors, but also for customers and machine users. So next, we're going to be looking at the key dates and the timeline of the regulation. So the new regulation states key dates and a transition period, which are all included within Article 54 of this regulation. So the regulation was published in the official journal on the 29th of June 2023, and it entered into force 20 days later on the 19th of July 2023. So this the application date of the regulation was will be the 20th of January 2027. So this is a key date for manufacturers to have in mind, the 20th of January 2027. So from this date, all manufacturers must ensure that their machine is fully compliant with the requirements of the new regulation. In the meantime, we are currently in a transitional period of 42 months. And this period but the extent of this period has been provided due to the number of changes of the regulation. But this transition period gives manufacturers the opportunity needed to become more familiar with the new requirements and ensure that they are fully prepared and able to make their machinery compliant in advance of the application date. One key point is that the regulation does not allow for early application of the regulation. So this means that manufacturers must continue to comply with the directive up until the application date on the 20th of January 2027. However, before that, companies must be already familiar with and already dealing with the new requirements before this date. From this application date, the declaration of conformity or the operating instructions and any technical documentation must have already been prepared in accordance with the new regulation. And for those who don't know, a corrigendum has been published post the publishing of the regulation, which has made some amendments to the original dates published in the regulation. So these adjustments have been marked with a subscript 1 on this slide and on the following slide. Following from this, there are several exceptions to this application date. So from the 20th of January 2024, member states must notify the Commission of all conformity assessment bodies designated under the regulation. Starting on the 20th of October 2026, each member state will apply its own penalties for the breach of regulations. Made effective back in the 19th of July 2023, market surveillance authorities and the Commission can now launch inspections, but also trigger safeguard procedures against non-compliance machinery. And finally, made effective last year, on the 20th of July 2024, member states and the Commission will be able to start carrying out a review of what we're familiar with the term high-risk machinery, which we'll be going on to in more detail later on. So this is an overview of the timeline and how these dates come into play. As a quick walkthrough, all the manufacturers and importers placing machinery onto the market continue to issue declarations of conformity against the directive up until the application date in 2027, whereafter they must issue declarations against the new regulation. Machinery distributors, they must ensure that that machinery compliance against the directive up until the application date. Then any machinery placed on the market after this date must comply with the regulation. However, machinery placed on the market before this date can continue to be distributed with machinery directive compliance. So now we'll talk about some of the product inclusions and exclusions incorporated within the regulation. So these products listed here were already mentioned in the directive, but the regulation has gone on further to clarify and consolidate some of these terms into broader umbrellas. So first of all, products listed within this regulation, we talk about machinery for professional commercial use or for industrial applications, but also incorporates the use of non-professional machinery, so DIY machinery, for example. The regulation has introduced a new term called related products, which you'll see the term used throughout the regulation. You'll see it using the term machinery and related products. So when it talks about related products, it talks about these equipment listed here. So we've got interchangeable equipment, safety components, lifting accessories, chains, rope and webbing, and finally removable mechanical transmission devices, all categorized as related products. And finally, partly completed machinery also remains included in the regulation as it has been in the directive. For the purpose of clarification, there are also several product types that are covered in the regulation, despite it not being initially obvious when reviewing the document. So this includes some of these products listed here. So we've got personal light electric vehicles, and this includes products such as electric bikes and e-scooters. We've got electrically operated furniture, adaptive printed machinery, so 3D printers, and machinery or related products that have been substantially modified after first being placed on the market. So all of these products are still included within the scope of the regulation. I'll now take you through some of the key changes with this new regulation. So on this slide, we're going to look over some of the biggest and structural and biggest technical updates of the regulation. Some of the technical changes I'll be covering in more detail later on in this webinar. So I should say that the majority of the content, around 80 to 90% of the regulation, remains exactly the same as the directive. but some of these new updates that have been completed are still very important for the progression and the safety of the industry. So first, as we've already touched upon, this will now be a regulation instead of a directive. Several of the articles and annexes have been reordered in the new regulation, and this is to improve the flow and provide a logical sequence. And the regulation has now adopted the familiar structure of the NLF, similar to other CE marking directives and regulations. So not included in the directive, the regulation now explicitly covers the incorporation of artificial intelligence and machine learning modules in integration into safety functions. And integration of cybersecurity as well, and related provisions for safety control systems and compliance-related software and data is another big topic, which I'll be going on to later on. We also talk about the use of autonomous and remotely controlled machinery. So this has been captured under the new and existing EHSRs, which covers unmanned and remote operated machines. This could include machines like drones, AGVs, and remotely operated robotic cells, etc. Permitting the distribution of digital instructions and digital EU declaration is now permitted. And another big change is the case where suitable harmonized standards aren't available or aren't yet harmonized with the regulation. The regulation now refers to this term common specification, which I mentioned earlier, and these common specifications will also be published in the official journal. And these have been included to help bridge this gap during this transfer period from the directive to the new regulation, but also going forwards, these common specifications can also be applied where standards aren't available. Finally, safeguards and safeguard recall procedures have been aligned with the rest of the new legislative framework. So if a machine poses a serious risk, authorities across sectors and borders can act quickly and consistently to resolve any issues that they may come across. So during this webinar, I'll also be covering the introduction of self-evolving behavior using machine learning and artificial intelligence. Another key change that manufacturers, importers, and users will have to get familiar with is that the new Annex I of the machinery regulation, which corresponds to high-risk machinery, which is originally listed in Annex IV of the Machinery Directive. So Annex I now mandates the need for notified body assessments for specific machinery in the regulation, and I'll be covering more on this list later on. And the last one here is a key change to lots of the definitions in the regulation, which is our first topic for that we'll be going into more detail now. So lots of these definitions have either been the introduction of new terms that have been used in the regulation, or in some cases, a clarification of existing terms that we are familiar with from the directive. So the first definition that I'm going to cover is the addition of the term substantial modification. So this term was added because the Machinery Directive, it never provided a clear distinction between ordinary maintenance and ordinary repairs and any post-market changes that could alter the machine's safety. So this term, substantial modification, has now been introduced to cover any unplanned changes to a machine after it's been placed on the market or put into service, where the modifications could create new hazards or increase existing risks. So to qualify as a substantial modification, the change must either be the introduction of new guards or protected devices, which would require modification of the existing safety-related control system, or where the change demands additional measures to maintain or enhance the machine's stability or mechanical strength. In effect, any physical or digital modification that introduces new hazards or raises the existing risk would prompt a full conformity assessment under the regulation. This, of course, includes any software modification to the machinery safety control system. And as you would expect, when any organization performs a substantial modification, they will then take on full responsibility as the manufacturer. The introduction of this new definition helps us to ensure that any modification beyond any simple repairs or maintenance would be carried out and would be carried out without cannot be carried out without a review of the full machinery's safety. The next definition we're going to look at is the introduction of the new term economic operators. And this term has been used to group together all members of the supply chain with a clear, harmonized objective for placing and keeping machinery on the EU market. So under the old machinery directive, these terms were dealt with separately. So it dealt with terms of manufacturers, importers, and distributors. But this new regulation brings all these terms together and all these roles together into one single term. And this does, of course, this term, economic operator, does include anyone carrying out substantial modifications to the machine or related parts. So the next term is safety components. So this term from the directive has been, we're familiar with from the directive, but it's now been slightly adjusted for the regulation. The regulation now tells us that a safety component, whether physical or digital, which is independently placed on the market and designed to fulfill a safety function, is classed as a safety component. So the regulation does expand on the definition to provide additional clarity, but the key change here is that the regulation now includes digital components. Therefore, independent safety software will also need to be certified against the regulation and carry its own CE marking, which is a big change that we're seeing from the directive. Annex III of the new regulations now incorporates the EHSRs, so the essential health and safety requirements of machinery. In Part 3 of Annex III, we introduced new definitions associated with autonomous mobile machinery. So this is one of the examples showing how the regulation is set out to keep up to date with the state of the art and technological advancements. And this term, autonomous mobile machinery, covers any machinery which is self-navigating machinery that operates without human presence or human interaction. It goes on to introduce additional terms associated with this. So it introduces the term supervisor, which means any person who monitors autonomous mobile machinery operations and who is able to ensure safe running and has the ability to remotely intervene to prevent or stop hazardous motions. So while the supervisor is the person who remotely monitors the machine, the term safety function, supervisory function, another new term, describes what that person does. So where they're required to, where the supervisor is required to analyze the data and operational information presented to them by the autonomous machine. So this regulation also states that the machines shall not be able to operate if this supervisory function is not active, another requirement of the regulation. So most of you will be aware of the term Annex IV machinery, and this has commonly been used to define typically high-risk machinery, as stated and listed within the machinery directive. However, due to the restructuring of the new regulation, these high-risk machinery and the listed machinery have now been moved into the new regulations Annex I. So this is something else that that manufacturers and users will need to get familiar with using the new term Annex I for high-risk machinery. The originally listed Annex IV machinery from the directive moved into the regulation have now been split into two parts. So we've got Part A, Part B. So these parts determine what specific conformity assessment procedures are required for the items listed. So the regulation mandates that all Annex I Part A machinery, as you can see listed here, must undergo a notified body assessment to allow product certification. So the regulation states three conformity methods and how they can be fulfilled. So the list of the machinery and related products as listed in Part A includes items that we are familiar with, such as guarding for removable mechanical transmission devices and vehicle servicing lifts. But it also includes new components in this, and it talks about safety components or machinery embedded systems with fully or partially self-evolving behavior, which is new. a new category of product listed within the regulation. And again, this is another key change that the regulation is introduced to reflect the technological development that we're seeing in the industry. So here we see the first half of the machinery and related products listed in Annex I, Part B. So this regulation states that to enable product certification, the manufacturer or party carrying out any substantial modifications can choose to apply either one of the notified body assessment processes, as I mentioned for Part A machinery, or instead they can employ internal production control measures. So following the requirements in the regulation. So this would ensure that they obviously seek compliance with the the EHSRs listed in the regulation. So essentially here for Part B machinery, having an assessment carried out by a notified body is optional as long as they have stated internal processes and procedures that are followed that comply with the requirements of the regulation. This is the just a slide showing the second half of the Part B listed machinery. No new items have been added to this list compared to the directive. So now we're going to be looking at the AI and cybersecurity aspects. So the machinery regulation now covers what we would typically call AI-based functions. What a lot of us would call AI-based functions. But these systems are captured by Annex I Part A, as I just covered on the previous slide. So the regulation describes these as safety components with fully or partially self-evolving behavior and machinery embedded systems with fully or partially self-evolving behavior. So the regulation sets out to ensure that these systems are safely integrated into physical machines. So the regulation now reflects that these systems within the EHSRs specify the criteria for their integration into machinery. And in particular, the regulation mandates that the manufacturer's risk assessment must cover the entire life cycle of the machinery and must now include any foreseeable hazards arising due to the system's self-evolving behavior. So any systems incorporate self-evolving behavior, a full risk assessment must incorporate any avenues or any considerations of that new development. As a side note, it's also worth highlighting that the EU AI Act, which came into effect in August last year, regulates the AI systems themselves. And that act was introduced to cover the broader key issues related with AI. So and that also provides us with a risk-based framework. So the EU AI Act classed AI application into certain categories. It described them as forbidden use of AI application, high risk use, and limited risk tiers. And this requires a clear disclosure for AI decision making, but also data management and human supervision. So refer to the EU AI Act for more information on that. So in addition to AI, the regulation now incorporates provisions to address hazards associated with cybersecurity. So part of this is covered by Annex III, and where EHSR 1.1.9, as you can see there, and it's described as protection against corruption. So this EHSR states requirements that any software or data critical to your machine safety must be protected against both accidental or intentional corruption. So this new EHSR requires that any machinery or related products that uses data transmitting or receiving hardware, they must ensure that all the software must log any interaction with that machine, whether these interactions are legitimate or illegitimate. Secondly, EHSR 1.2.1 requires that any control system, hardware and software must be resilient to external influences, and this includes any foreseeable malicious attacks. So in practice, manufacturers will need to incorporate various protection strategies, and these measures may include things like threat model attacks, authorized software startups, or functions that will initiate a safe mode intervention if any attacks did occur. The good news is that if you already hold a cybersecurity certificate or a statement of conformity under the EU Cybersecurity Act, then you will automatically satisfy these two EHSRs within the regulation. The next key change I'll be covering is the option for manufacturers to provide instructions and information regarding the machine in a digital format. So this addition is referenced in 4 places within the regulation. So first in Annex I, EHSR 1.7.4, this tells us that the required content of what the instructions must include. This EHSR also refers us to Article 10, Part 7. And in Article 10, Part 7, this covers the format and the language that documentation must be provided in. And as expected, same as the directive, the instructions must be provided in a language of all the relevant member states associated with that machinery. But as I mentioned, the regulation now permits manufacturers to provide this information and instructions for use in a digital format instead of a hard copy. Manufacturers will still need to make sure that all the information and the instructions do meet the criteria as stated within the regulation. Then Annex 5 goes on and it covers the EU, the Declaration of Conformity. And these documents can now also be provided in a digital format and include a digital signature, which is something that the Machinery Directive did not permit. So these could be made available either by the introduction of QR codes on the machinery, and also, or by linking the user to a web portal hosting these documents online. Going on from that, the last point here, we have Annex 11, and this states that any assembly instructions can also be supplied in a digital format. So regulation tells us that we can also have a combination of a hard copy and digital format for different document types. For example, the assembly instructions may be provided as a hard copy, but those instructions could also include a QR code, which gives the user access to the digital declaration of incorporation. So this new addition in the regulation helps to reduce administrative costs, reduce printing costs, but also helps out the environment as well. And this would be something that will provide benefits going forwards for the manufacturers, economic operators, but also helps customers, and users, giving them the flexibility of using digital documentation. So when providing these digital instructions, there's specific requirements within the regulation that manufacturers must comply with. So firstly, the manufacturer must provide a method of accessing these digital instructions. So as I mentioned, this could be done by the use of a QR code, but if there's not room on the product for that, they could even supply a short HTML link. But if there's no room for a QR code or a link on the product, they can also incorporate those methods of accessing it on the packaging or any accompanying documentation. So next, the digital manuals must be able to be downloadable and must be printable. And when using an online digital format, the manufacturer must ensure that the documents are kept available for at least 10 years or the lifetime of the machinery, whichever is the longer period. At the time of purchase, if a customer asks or requests for a paper copy of the information or the instructions for use, then the manufacturer must provide this, and it must be free of charge and must be delivered within 1 month. So that covers the key changes that are included within the regulation. During this next chapter, we'll be looking at the regulations and surrounding aspects of how it will evolve over the next several years. So the next steps, so the European Commission will now need to determine out of which of the hundreds of standards that are currently harmonized against the Machinery Directive will be carried over and become harmonized with the new machinery regulation. a commission implementing decision publishing the full updated list of standards is targeted and expected by the end of 2026. Then next, the Commission will be planning to update a guide to this machinery regulation. This will be a non-binding document, but this guide would provide a definitive reference to interpreting the obligations under the new regulation. And this is likely to be a highly useful and a highly referenced document, similar to the Machinery Directive guidance document that we are all familiar with. Going forwards, the newly referenced Annex I, talking about high-risk machinery, will also have tighter controls and tighter reviews. And this will include the European Commissioning will be issuing templates and guidance, and these will be for all member states to collect and publish accident data on any fatal or serious injuries arising from these Annex I listed machinery. Once those templates and guidance have been published, a 5-year cycle will be initiated where all member states must submit this accident data every 5 years. Once the data has been received by the European Commission, this information will then get analyzed, and this also help conclude the suitability of the products listed within Part A and Part B of the Annex, and decide whether or not a notified body assessment is applicable for those listed products. So this gives the European Commission the option to reorder or introduce or remove some of the machinery listed in Part A and Part B of Annex I. So this will become a more structured, cyclical process, and it will give us, but also include guide revisions, but also data collection and further Annex I assessments. This will make sure that the machinery regulations stays in line with the industrial experiences that we experience. And for a final summary, so I hope everyone has gained some further understanding about the new machinery regulation, and I hope you might understand that it's now not just a simple paperwork update, but it's now giving us this single directly applicable rulebook to EU member states and designed to keep everyone across these states aligned with regarding machinery safety. So it replaces this old directive. It will remove national variation, but also bring clarity in ensuring manufacturers the manufacture of safe machinery. So the key date to remember is the 20th of January 2027, and this application date is when all the new machinery placed on the market must be complying with the new regulations. And this will mean we have one law, one set of expectations. It will give us a smoother market and a more concrete legal framework, but also that will also grow with industrial innovations. Thank you, everyone, for joining me this morning, and I hope I've helped improve your knowledge surrounding the subject of the new machinery regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Hef. We have received a lot of questions, which is great to see, but unfortunately we won't have time to answer them all today. But as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, we'll answer any unanswered questions over email after the webinar. So I'll pass back over to you, Hef, to run through some of the questions we've received.
Fantastic. Thank you, Danielle. Yeah, as I can see, there's a lot of questions that have popped up, so thank you all very much for that. So you can see here one question. So during the transitional period, do I need to certify machinery using harmonized standards under the old machinery directive? And will I need to apply the same standards when looking to comply with the machinery regulation? So during this transitional period, so until the application date on the 20th of January 2027, you'll still need to use these existing harmonized standards with the machinery directive during this transitional period. But during this time, we have technical committees that will be reviewing over all these harmonized standards that are currently listed in the official journals, ones that we are familiar with. And they will need to determine whether any changes need to take place to these standards, whether these standards require any modifications. in order to bring them in line with the new machinery regulation. And as you can expect, reviewing and analyzing and carrying out changes to all these standards is going to be a big task. But this intent is, the aim of this is to have it all complete by 2026, in advance of the application date 2027. Whether all standards would have been reviewed by then, I'm not sure. But by this point, we're hoping to receive a somewhat list of the published standards that are harmonized with the machinery regulation. And this is something to keep an eye out for sure. As I meant, So, but until then, manufacturers need to become fully familiar with the new regulation and its requirements in advance of that date. Another question here. So, is it realistic to rely entirely on AI for functional safety control? This is a good topic. So obviously we're seeing the introduction of the use of self-evolving safety functions incorporated within the machinery regulation. And although we're not quite seeing it yet, we are currently in the forefront of integrating artificial intelligence into functional safety control systems. So my opinion is that I think it's highly unlikely that we're going to see safety control systems relying 100% on AI to guarantee correct operation of functional safety control systems, particularly in the short term, in the near future. But the first steps the industry is looking into is looking to integrate part AI functionality alongside our established safety control systems. And by doing this, we need to make sure there's a clear separation between our AI logic and our core safety functions. And we also need to make sure that those core safety functions are able to override any of the AI functionality if there is any deviation outside of the intended scope. But as you would expect, as I mentioned as well, that there will need to be a full form of risk assessment on the self-evolving behavior of any safety systems that have been introduced, and any models and also training data will also need to be fully verified as well.
Sorry to interrupt, Hef. Probably time for one more question.
One more question. Okay, thank you, Danielle. So for industrial machinery, do we have to supply a paper manual at all, or is digital only documentation sufficient? So the standard is the regulation has given us the option. So for professional use machinery, so for a typical industry, the regulation does allow for digital formats only. Information and instructions, as long as all those information provided complies with the requirements of the regulation. So they must be downloadable, must be printable, must be remain active and live for 10 years or the lifetime of the machine. But also must be available on the machine itself. So for professional use, digital only format is permitted, but if the customer requests for hard copy documentation, then that must be provided within 1 month and free of charge. So thank you much, everybody, for those questions. Over to you, Tessa.
Perfect. Thank you, Hef, and thank you again for everyone joining us. As mentioned earlier, we'll be giving you the on-demand version of the webinar after the event has finished. For attending the event, you now have 10% off at Tufted Academy training course if you use the exclusive webinar discount code webinar_10. This can be used on any of our courses, including any of our machinery courses scheduled for the remainder of the year. Keep your eyes peeled for other webinar topics on this topic, which you will find on the resource section on our website, www.tufted.com/em-gb. Please get in touch to let us know if there's any other webinar subjects you would like us to cover. It's great to hear exactly what you're interested in hearing about. Feel free to get in touch with me for any training related questions. My email is danielle.boyce@tufsa.com or send any inquiries to info.uk@tufsa.com. On behalf of myself, Heaven, and everyone at TUFSUD, thank you for taking your time today to join our webinar and enjoy the rest of your day.